When I go about making things in my shop, I use all the tools I've collected for 15 years. It's easy sometimes to throw something together when big machines do so much of the work. I realize that there are people that have few tools that want to get into woodworking but have a hard time knowing how to get started. Today, we're going to use 3 power tools and some simple, non-expensive basic hand tools to build a benchtop router table for less than $30. Today I'm going to be working with 2 half-inch sheets of Baltic birch, which can be found at craft stores pretty cheaply. I got the 2 sheets for less than $8. Both sheets are 20 inches by 20 inches. With the first sheet of ply, I cut it directly down the middle. This, of course, left me with 2 halves that were nearly 10 inches wide and 20 inches long. The plan was to use these as walls with the second ply as the tabletop. I cut out 2 aprons that fit between both walls. I added a little glue before using a little bit of tape to keep things lined up. This method of using tape worked, but I wouldn't depend on it if I had to use a lot of pressure to line things up. I used my 11/64 inch drill bit to drill out all my pilot holes, and used 1.5 inch drywall screws attached to the aprons, a total of 8 in all. You will notice here that I'm using an impact drill to put the screws in, but only because I hate switching between drills. A normal drill will work just fine. Now we'll use a mark to center the walls beneath with the above tabletop. While I didn't measure here, it really was irrelevant to the walls below. Just be sure to mark the center and then connect them on top. Afterwards, for my drill holes, I measured 2 inches from both sides and spaced them evenly throughout. Because I still wanted to glue the top to the aprons and the walls, I screwed in 1 screw enough that I could pivot the table around. I rotated it in the opposite way, adding the glue before I put 5 1-inch screws in each side. Time to find the center of the table. By marking off the diagonals, we'll later be able to line up our square plexiglass lines to find the center of the table. For my router to fit inside this table and be able to be pulled out easily, I needed about a 6-inch radius. I went with 8.5 inches squared, which is a printer paper sheet folded in half. I attached my pattern to my plexiglass. I've got a link to a piece of 12-inch by 12-inch by 3/16 inch plexiglass I used down in the description. I can't tell you how much it costs, but it, with the rest of the material, still costs less than the $30 in all for this project. To cut the plexiglass, I will be using a metal jigsaw blade. I'm going to throw caution here. I made a huge mistake when I cut the first side down by leaving the speed of my jigsaw too high. I've checked even the cheapest jigsaws and found that they all pretty much have variable speeds. With me cutting with the blade as fast as it was, I ended up causing the plastic to fuse behind the jigsaw. And when I corrected my mistake and slowed it down, it worked better without any problems. After it was cut, I simply lined up the points of the square with the diagonal lines to find the exact center of the table. Now, where the lines intersected, I put a dot that I'll use to center the plate to the router. I traced around the square before measuring a 1/2 inch in on all sides and placing a secondary line. This 1/2 inch lip will be what our plexiglass will rest on. To cut out the center, we'll drill holes on the outside of each 1/2 inch lip corner and switch out the metal blade in our jigsaw back to a wood blade. With the plexiglass, I eyeballed the center and marked the holes for my bolts. This is an important step. Drilling out plexiglass can be tricky. When you come to the end of your drilling, it can very easily chip out. To avoid this, use brad bits and drill halfway through the plexiglass, allowing the small tip to exit the other side. Then, flip the plexiglass and line the hole up with your brad bit and drill the other way. After that, either be careful and use a large drill bit to widen the holes for your bolts, or get an inexpensive countersink bit. Now, we'll use either a Forstner bit or a spade bit to cut halfway through again. This should be at least 1 inch wide, and again, we'll flip it over and finish it off. Another bad move on my part was thinking I was done when I wasn't. I really should have left that plastic on. We still need to add holes that will allow us to remove this from our table. When I had finished those, I added the bolts and tightened the router snug to the plexiglass. You might think that the project outside of routing the top is finished, but we still have one more obstacle to overcome. We'll need to be able to secure this to the bench, as well as adding a bit more height for the router. The problem, of course, with a 2x4 is that most jigsaw blades aren't quite long enough. Since we started with 1x3s for our aprons, I decided to stick with them and double them up, creating essentially a 2x3. After gluing, I clamped either side of the base and then added glue to where the walls met up with the base. I then used a couple strips of wood I cut from the leftover 1x3 and glued them to the inside walls and to the base, giving it added strength. I waited about 2 hours before flipping and doing the same process on the opposite side, allowing a good 10 hours or so for it to cure enough for use. To get the exact depth for the 3/16 inch plexiglass, I used a piece of scrap from the plexiglass I cut to dial in my straight cut router bit to the exact size of the plate it's attached to. I attached the handles, and from here it was as simple as keeping my router within the lines. Of course, because routers can't make square cuts, I use a chisel to knock off the corners. If you don't have a chisel, you could, of course, use a piece of sandpaper to round the edges of your plexiglass so that it fits in. As a quick example, I made quick work with a round over bit and a 45-degree angle bit. This just gives a really nice finish to projects. It's important to make a note here that without a fence, the only bits you should be using here are bits with bearings on them. But let's make a real quick fence with the remainder we have left from the 1x3. We'll cut 2 boards the length of the table and then glue them together perpendicularly. I use the same method as before with masking tape. You can also use a square block of wood on either end and clamp it together. Now that I've given it a few hours, we'll give it a test. To set up the half round cut, we'll very carefully slide our fence to what we want our depth to be. And then carefully slide it back out. We'll shut off our router, insert the fence back in, and clamp everything down. Of course, we could add all sorts of other features to this as well as a dust port, but if you're just getting started, this will get you very far with very little. And yes, there are definitely plans for a fence upgrade in the future. And by the way, if you haven't seen my router rails video, it fits perfectly with this concept, allowing you to pull your router directly out of your table and setting it into a sled system to flatten wood. That video will be at the end of this video and in the description. I highly recommend checking it out. Thanks for watching. Hit the like button and subscribe to see more videos like this in the future. Let me know what you think of this project or how it could be better. I really love input. Follow me on Instagram at MakeThingsWithRob, and remember to keep making things.